Officer James Wilson sat in his patrol car, watching the steady flow of vehicles passing through the main street of Riverside. The small city was busier than usual tonight. The annual spring festival had brought visitors from neighboring towns, creating more traffic than the quiet streets typically saw. Wilson was new to Riverside, having transferred from a larger police department just 3 months ago. At 29, he was eager to prove himself to his new colleagues. His supervisor had assigned him to monitor traffic during the festival, a simple task for a Friday evening. Dispatched to Unit 14, we're getting calls about congestion near Main and Oak, crackled his radio. Unit 14 responding, Wilson replied, starting his engine. He pulled into traffic, observing the drivers around him. The streets were lined with colorful banners announcing the festival. People walked along the sidewalks carrying food and souvenirs. Wilson had yet to explore much of Riverside himself. Between settling into his new apartment and learning the routes of his patrol area, he hadn't had time to get to know the community well. This was one reason why Wilson didn't recognize many faces yet, including those of important local officials. His previous department had been much larger, with clear separation between police work and city politics. Here in Riverside, everyone seemed to know everyone, except him. Wilson turned onto Oak Street, where traffic had indeed slowed to a crawl. He drove carefully through the congestion, noticing several minor violations: a car with tinted windows that were likely too dark, another driver talking on a cell phone, and a silver sedan with a broken taillight. The silver sedan caught his attention. Not only was the taillight broken, but the driver also made an abrupt lane change without signaling. Wilson decided this was worth a stop. He switched on his lights and followed the sedan. It took nearly 30 seconds for the driver to notice the flashing lights behind them. The car finally pulled over near the entrance to the city park. Wilson radioed in the license plate number and his location before stepping out of his patrol car. Following standard procedure, he approached the vehicle from the driver's side, hand resting near, but not on, his holster. The tinted windows made it difficult to see inside until the driver lowered the window. Behind the wheel sat a woman in her early 40s. She wore a navy blue blazer over a white blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she looked annoyed. "License and registration, please," Wilson said in the professional tone he'd practiced countless times. "Officer, I'm running late for an event at the festival," the woman replied, her voice tense but controlled. "What seems to be the problem?" "You have a broken taillight, ma'am, and you changed lanes without signaling," Wilson explained. "I'll need to see your license and registration." The woman sighed heavily and began searching through her designer briefcase. She pulled out folders and a tablet, setting them on the passenger seat. Her movements became increasingly frantic as she emptied more contents from the bag. "I must have left my wallet in my other purse," she said, looking up at Wilson. "I'm Elaine Thompson. I'm the—" "Without identification, I can't verify who you are, ma'am," Wilson interrupted, following protocol. "Do you have any form of ID with you?" The woman's expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief. "Officer, I'm Elaine Thompson, the mayor of Riverside," she stated firmly. "I'm late for giving the opening speech at our city festival." Wilson hesitated. The name sounded vaguely familiar from department memos, but having never met the mayor, he couldn't confirm her identity. In his training, people often claimed to be someone important when stopped. It was a common tactic. "I'll need to verify your identity, Miss Thompson," Wilson said evenly. "Can you please step out of the vehicle?" Elaine Thompson stared at Officer Wilson with wide eyes. She couldn't believe what was happening. After 3 years as mayor of Riverside, most people recognized her face from town meetings, local news, and community events. "Step out of the vehicle. Is this really necessary?" she asked, glancing at the dashboard clock. Her speech was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes, and the festival grounds were still 5 blocks away. "Yes, ma'am." "Standard procedure when a driver can't provide identification," Wilson replied firmly. His training had emphasized consistency in applying rules, regardless of who the person claimed to be. With a deep sigh, Mayor Thompson opened her car door. She stood up, smoothing her blazer and straightening her posture. At 5'4", she had to look up to meet Officer Wilson's eyes. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but this is a misunderstanding. My assistant has my spare key card to City Hall. We can go there right now and confirm my identity." Wilson glanced at his watch. Taking her to City Hall would mean leaving his patrol area during a busy festival night. I'm afraid that won't be possible at this time, ma'am. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I have a driver without identification who claims to be Mayor Thompson. Can you confirm her identity? After a brief pause, the dispatcher's voice crackled through. Unit 14, can you describe the individual? Wilson described Elaine while she stood there, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently on the pavement. That general description matches the mayor, the dispatcher responded, but we can't positively confirm identity without proper ID or visual verification from someone who knows her. Wilson noticed a small crowd beginning to gather on the sidewalk. Some people were pointing and whispering. A few had taken out their phones, possibly recording the interaction. I need to secure this situation, Wilson thought to himself, increasingly uncomfortable with the audience. Ma'am, until we can verify your identity, I need to make sure you don't leave the scene, Wilson explained. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. You're going to handcuff me? Mayor Thompson's voice rose sharply. This is absurd. Call Sergeant Martinez. She knows exactly who I am. I'd already called dispatch, and they can't confirm your identity, Wilson said, his own frustration building. The handcuffs are temporary until we sort this out. More people had stopped to watch. The crowd had grown to about 15 curious onlookers, with more joining by the minute. Do you have any other form of identification? Wilson asked, hoping to resolve the situation. A work badge? Credit cards? Anything with your name? Mayor Thompson closed her eyes momentarily, thinking. My speech, she suddenly exclaimed. In my briefcase, there's a folder with my speech for tonight. It has Mayor Thompson printed on the cover. Wilson retrieved the briefcase from her car and found the folder. True enough, Mayor Elaine Thompson, Spring Festival opening address, was printed on the cover. But this still wasn't official identification. This helps, but I still need to verify. Wilson began. James? What's going on here? A familiar voice called out. Wilson turned to see Sergeant Martinez approaching from across the street, the festival security detail that brought her over after noticing the commotion. I've stopped this woman for a traffic violation, and she can't produce identification, Wilson explained. She claims to be Mayor Thompson. Sergeant Martinez looked from Wilson to the woman and then back to Wilson, with disbelief spreading across her face. Officer Wilson, Martinez said slowly, this is indeed Mayor Thompson. Wilson felt his stomach drop. The crowd around them had grown larger, and he noticed at least 5 people recording with their phones. Mayor Thompson, I am so sorry for the confusion, Martinez said, stepping forward. Officer Wilson just transferred to our department and is still getting to know the community. Mayor Thompson checked her watch and shook her head. I'm now officially late for my speech. Can someone please drive me to the festival immediately? Sergeant Martinez quickly took control of the situation. She instructed Wilson to return to his patrol car while she personally escorted Mayor Thompson to the festival. The crowd continued to grow, many people whispering and pointing at the scene unfolding before them. I'll drive you myself, Mayor Thompson, Sergeant Martinez said, gesturing toward her police cruiser parked across the street. We'll have you at the podium in 5 minutes. Officer Wilson stood frozen, his face flushed with embarrassment. In his 3 months at Riverside Police Department, he had worked hard to build a good reputation. Now, in just 5 minutes, he had managed to almost handcuff the city's highest-ranking official. Wilson, we'll discuss this when I return, Martinez said firmly but quietly as she passed him. Secure the mayor's vehicle and continue your patrol duties. As Mayor Thompson walked away with Sergeant Martinez, she glanced back at Wilson with a mixture of frustration and disbelief on her face. The crowd parted to let them through, many people now recognizing the mayor and showing confused expressions. Wilson returned to the silver sedan to retrieve the keys. As he leaned inside, he noticed a city pin with the Riverside logo lying in the center console, something he had missed earlier. He picked it up, feeling even worse about the mistake. Nice going, rookie, a voice called from the crowd. First day on the job. Wilson ignored the comment, locked the mayor's car, and returned to his patrol vehicle. As he sat down, his radio crackled to life. Unit 14, please report to station when shift ends. Captain Reynolds wants to see you. The dispatcher's voice sounded unusually formal. Copy that, Wilson replied, his voice barely audible. Meanwhile, Sergeant Martinez's cruiser pulled up to the festival grounds. The event coordinator rushed to meet them, looking panicked. Mayor Thompson, we've been trying to reach you. The opening ceremony started 10 minutes ago, and the crowd is getting restless. Mayor Thompson straightened her blazer as she stepped out of the police car. I apologize for the delay. I was detained. Sergeant Martinez winced at the choice of words. I'll make sure this incident is properly addressed, Mayor Thompson. The mayor nodded curtly, then took a deep breath and transformed her expression into a welcoming smile before following the coordinator toward the stage. Back in his patrol car, Wilson drove slowly through the festival traffic, his mind racing. He had followed protocol, hadn't he? A driver without identification was standard procedure. But he should have called his supervisor immediately when the person claimed to be a public official. His phone buzzed with a text from a fellow officer. Heard you tried to arrest the mayor. Bold career move, rookie. Wilson groaned and put his phone away. News traveled fast in a small department. Across town at the festival, Mayor Thompson climbed the steps to the stage. The crowd applauded as she approached the microphone, though many looked confused at her late arrival. She smiled broadly, showing none of the frustration from moments earlier. Good evening, Riverside. I apologize for keeping you waiting. Sometimes even the mayor gets caught in festival traffic. The crowd laughed, and she continued with her prepared speech. But as she spoke about community and togetherness, her mind kept returning to the young officer who had nearly handcuffed her. Part of her was furious at the disrespect and embarrassment. Another part recognized that the officer was new and following rules. After finishing her speech to enthusiastic applause, she stepped backstage where Sergeant Martinez was waiting. We need to talk about what happened, Mayor Thompson said firmly. Not just about Officer Wilson, but about police procedures in our city. Yes, Mayor, Martinez replied, already dreading the conversation. I've asked him to report to Captain Reynolds after his shift. Good, the mayor said, because I'll be there too. Both women knew that whatever happened next would extend far beyond a simple traffic stop. The videos taken by bystanders would be online within minutes. By morning, the whole city would be talking about how Officer Wilson almost arrested Mayor Thompson. Officer Wilson parked his patrol car behind the police station at exactly 11:30 p.m. His shift had ended, but his night was far from over. The remainder of his patrol had passed in a blur, his mind constantly replaying the incident with Mayor Thompson. He checked his phone before heading inside. 3 missed calls from his mother, probably wanting to catch up on his week. 5 text messages from fellow officers, all variations of heard what happened, and good luck with the captain. But worst of all, a link from his friend Terry to a social media post already gaining traction online. The post showed a shaky 30-second video titled "Cop Doesn't Know Mayor, Almost Arrests Her." It had over 2,000 views already. Wilson clicked play and immediately regretted it. The video started midway through the encounter, completely missing the context of the traffic stop. It began with them asking the mayor to place her hands behind her back and ended with Sergeant Martinez arriving. Perfect, Wilson muttered, pocketing his phone and heading into the station. The usually lively evening shift was unusually quiet as he walked through. Conversation stopped. Eyes followed him. A few officers gave him sympathetic nods, but most simply watched as he made his way to Captain Reynolds' office. Outside the door, Wilson took a deep breath and straightened his uniform. He knocked firmly. Enter, came the gruff voice of Captain Reynolds. Wilson stepped inside, surprised to find not only Captain Reynolds behind his desk, but also Sergeant Martinez, standing to one side. Most shocking of all, Mayor Thompson herself sat in one of the visitor chairs, still in her blue blazer from earlier. Officer Wilson, join us, Captain Reynolds said, gesturing to the empty chair beside the mayor. Wilson swallowed hard and sat down, keeping his posture perfect. Captain, Sergeant. He nodded to each, then turned slightly, Mayor Thompson. The mayor's expression remained neutral as she acknowledged him with a slight nod. I assume you understand why you're here, Captain Reynolds began, folding his hands on his desk. Yes, sir, Wilson replied. Regarding the traffic stop incident with Mayor Thompson. Incident, the mayor repeated, the word hanging in the air. That's one way to describe it. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat. Officer Wilson, walk us through exactly what happened from the beginning. Wilson explained everything in detail: the broken taillight, the lane change without signaling, the mayor's inability to produce identification, and his decision to follow standard protocol. I didn't recognize Mayor Thompson, Wilson admitted. I'm still learning faces in Riverside, and while her name sounded familiar from department memos, I couldn't verify her identity without proper ID. Mayor Thompson shifted in her seat. Officer Wilson, she said, her voice calmer than he expected, I understand following protocol. What I don't understand is why you didn't simply call someone who could identify me or escort me to City Hall as I suggested. Wilson hesitated. I was concerned about leaving my patrol area during a high-traffic event, and dispatch couldn't confirm your identity. Sergeant Martinez stepped forward. That's partly on me, Captain. Our department hasn't properly introduced new transfers to key city officials. Officer Wilson transferred here 3 months ago, but hasn't attended any city functions where he would have met the mayor. Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. I see. He turned to the mayor. What's your take on this situation, Mayor Thompson? The mayor stood up and paced the small office. The festival speech went well despite my delay, but as I was leaving, 3 different people showed me videos of the incident that are already circulating online. She turned to face Wilson directly. By morning, this will be all over town. Wilson felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. His career in Riverside might be over before it truly began. The question is, Mayor Thompson continued, what are we going to do about it? Because this isn't just about Officer Wilson or me. This is about public perception of our police department and city government. Captain Reynolds leaned forward. What exactly did you have in mind, Mayor? Before she could answer, a knock came at the door. The captain's secretary poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but you all need to see this. She held up her tablet showing a local news website. The headline read, Vuri A. Kenning, Riverside mayor detained by police officer who failed to recognize her. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the headline. The secretary handed the tablet to Captain Reynolds, who skimmed the article quickly, his face growing increasingly grim. They already have 3 different videos, he said, passing the tablet to Mayor Thompson, and witness quotes. Mayor Thompson reviewed the article, her composed expression never wavering. After years in politics, she had developed an excellent poker face. She handed the tablet back to the secretary. Thank you, Linda. Please keep monitoring the situation. Once the door closed, Mayor Thompson turned to face the 3 police officers. The small office suddenly felt even smaller. Well, she said, breaking the tense silence, it seems we no longer have the luxury of time to consider our response. Officer Wilson stared at the floor, his career flashing before his eyes. 3 months of work, all his plans for the future in Riverside, gone because of one traffic stop. Mayor Thompson, he said, finally looking up. I want to apologize formally for what happened. I was following protocol, but I should have handled the situation differently. The mayor studied him for a moment. Officer Wilson, I'm not interested in apologies right now. I'm interested in solutions. She turned to Captain Reynolds. This story will dominate local news for days. People will take sides. Half the town will say the officer was just doing his job, and the other half will demand his badge. Neither outcome serves our community. Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. What do you propose? Transparency and education, Mayor Thompson said immediately. Instead of letting this divide our community, we use it to bring people together. The room fell silent as they waited for her to continue. Tomorrow morning, Officer Wilson and I hold a joint press conference. We explain exactly what happened. He was following procedure. I was unable to provide ID, and neither of us was entirely wrong or entirely right. Wilson blinked in surprise. This was not at all what he had expected. Furthermore, the mayor continued, we announce a new community initiative. All new officers will attend city council meetings and community events as part of their training, and all city officials will carry proper identification at all times. She gave a slight, self-deprecating smile at this last point. Captain Reynolds leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal. It could work. turn a potential scandal into a positive change for the department and the city. Sergeant Martinez nodded. I think it's brilliant, actually. Shows leadership from both sides. All eyes turned to Wilson, who felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift from potential punishment to community initiative. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right, he said finally. But won't people still be angry? The videos make me look pretty bad. Some people will be angry no matter what we do, Mayor Thompson said matter-of-factly. But most people understand mistakes happen. What matters is how we respond to them. She turned to face Wilson directly. Officer, do you know why I became mayor of Riverside? No, ma'am. Because I believe in this community. I believe we can be better than the division and finger-pointing that plagues so many cities. This incident gives us a chance to prove that. For the first time since entering the office, Wilson felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe his career wasn't over after all. Captain Reynolds stood up. It's settled then. We'll prepare for a joint press conference tomorrow at 9 a.m. at City Hall. He looked at Wilson. Be in your full-dress uniform and be prepared for tough questions. As they all stood to leave, Mayor Thompson's phone buzzed with a new message. She checked it and gave a small laugh. My 16-year-old daughter just texted me, she said, showing them the screen. Apparently I'm trending locally. She wants to know if she still has to do her homework since her mom is internet famous now. The tension in the room broke as they all shared a brief laugh. Wilson realized then that Mayor Thompson was not just a title or a position. She was a person with a family, a sense of humor, and a genuine commitment to her community. He had failed to see that earlier, and he promised himself he wouldn't make that mistake again. By 8:30 the next morning, City Hall buzzed with activity. Journalists from local papers and nearby TV stations crowded the press room, setting up cameras and checking microphones. News of the incident had spread like wildfire overnight. The videos had collectively gained over 50,000 views, and social media was ablaze with opinions from all sides. Officer Wilson arrived in his dress uniform, freshly pressed and spotless. He had barely slept, spending most of the night practicing what he might say. Captain Reynolds met him at the side entrance, away from the reporters. Ready? The captain asked. As ready as I'll ever be, Wilson replied, adjusting his collar nervously. They walked to a small conference room where Mayor Thompson was reviewing notes with her assistant. She looked up when they entered, professional and composed in a dark gray suit. Good morning, Officer Wilson, she said. How are you holding up? Nervous, he admitted. I've never done a press conference before. She gave him a reassuring smile. Just be honest. That's all people really want? She checked her watch. We have 15 minutes. Let's go over the plan one more time. Meanwhile, in the press room, citizens were filling the available seats. Mrs. Garcia, who owned the bakery down the street from the police station, sat near the front. She had always found Officer Wilson to be polite when he stopped for coffee. I don't see what the big deal is, she said to her husband. The poor man was just doing his job. Behind them, Mr. Washington, a retired school teacher, shook his head. The issue is bigger than one officer. It's about recognizing our elected officials and showing proper respect. Similar conversations happened throughout the room, with people already taking sides before the conference even began. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the side door opened. Captain Reynolds entered first, followed by Mayor Thompson and Officer Wilson. Cameras flashed and reporters straightened in their seats. The three took their places behind the podium bearing the Riverside City seal. Captain Reynolds spoke first, giving a brief statement about the department's commitment to the community. Then he introduced Mayor Thompson. She stepped forward confidently, looking directly into the cameras. Good morning. Yesterday evening, I was stopped by Officer Wilson for a traffic violation. During this stop, I was unable to produce identification, which led to a situation that has now been widely shared online. She paused, making eye contact with various people in the audience. I want to be clear about something. Officer Wilson was following proper police procedure. When a driver cannot provide identification, officers are trained to take certain steps to verify identity. That is exactly what happened. Murmurs spread through the crowd. This was not the angry denunciation many had expected. However, the mayor continued, this incident has highlighted areas where both our city government and police department can improve. She outlined the new initiative for community integration, emphasizing how it would benefit both new officers and the public. As she spoke, Wilson watched the audience's reactions shift from skepticism to interest. When it was his turn to speak, Wilson stepped up to the microphone. His hands were trembling slightly, but his voice remained steady. Yesterday, I stopped a vehicle for a broken taillight and improper lane change. The driver identified herself as Mayor Thompson, but without proper ID, I followed standard procedure. He took a deep breath before continuing. I'm new to Riverside, having transferred here 3 months ago. While that explains why I didn't recognize Mayor Thompson, it doesn't excuse my failure to handle the situation with greater flexibility. A reporter raised her hand. Officer Wilson, do you think you should be disciplined for this incident? Before he could answer, another shouted, Mayor Thompson, are you calling for the officer's resignation? The mayor stepped forward. Let me be absolutely clear. Officer Wilson's job is not in jeopardy. This incident was a learning opportunity for everyone involved, including myself. She held up her wallet. I now carry 2 forms of ID at all times. This drew a small laugh from the crowd, easing some of the tension. Another reporter stood. Is this just damage control? The videos clearly show. The videos, Mayor Thompson interrupted firmly, show a partial view of a complex situation. What they don't show is the conversation Officer Wilson and I had afterward, or the productive meeting with Captain Reynolds where we developed a plan to strengthen relationships between city officials and our police force. As the questions continued, Wilson noticed something changing in the room. The angry divide he had feared wasn't materializing. Instead, people seemed genuinely interested in the solutions being offered. As the press conference concluded, Mayor Thompson and Officer Wilson stood side by side, answering the final questions from reporters. The tension that had filled the room an hour earlier had largely dissipated, replaced by a cautious optimism about the proposed community initiative. One last question called out a young reporter from the Riverside Daily. Officer Wilson, what have you personally learned from this experience? Wilson stepped forward to the microphone. This wasn't a question he had prepared for, but he decided honesty was his best approach. I've learned that following procedure isn't always enough, he said after a moment of thought. Being a good police officer means knowing your community, not just the streets and neighborhoods, but the people who live and work here too. His answer seemed to satisfy the crowd. Captain Reynolds announced the end of the press conference, and the 3 of them exited through the side door as reporters packed up their equipment. You did well in there, Mayor Thompson told Wilson once they were in the hallway. Very sincere. Thank you, Mayor. Wilson replied, I meant what I said. Captain Reynolds checked his phone. Early feedback looks positive. Local news is focusing on the community initiative rather than the incident itself. But not everyone was pleased with the outcome. As they walked toward the mayor's office, they passed a small group of protesters gathered in the lobby. Their signs read, Police accountability now, and no special treatment. Lisa Chen, a community activist known for her criticism of the police department, stepped forward. Mayor Thompson, a press conference doesn't solve the underlying issues here. Officer Wilson should face disciplinary action. The mayor stopped to address her. Ms. Chen, I understand your concerns, but punishing Officer Wilson won't improve police-community relations. Working together to prevent future incidents will. Chen didn't look convinced. So he gets a pass because you said so? Before the mayor could respond, Wilson spoke up. Ms. Chen, right? I don't expect a pass. I made a mistake in how I handled the situation, and I take full responsibility for that. Chen studied him, surprised by his directness. That's a start, she said finally. But we'll be watching to make sure this initiative isn't just talk. I hope you do, Mayor Thompson replied. In fact, we would like community representatives like yourself to help develop the program. Are you interested? The question caught Chen off guard. After a moment, she nodded. I'll think about it. As they continued down the hallway, Captain Reynolds leaned toward Wilson. Nice handling of that situation. You might survive this yet. Back at the police station, officers gathered around the break room television to watch news coverage of the press conference. Opinions were mixed, but most agreed Wilson had represented the department well under difficult circumstances. I wouldn't have been that calm, said Officer Rodriguez, pouring coffee. Facing all those cameras and reporters. No thanks. Sergeant Martinez changed the channel to another local station where a panel was discussing the incident. The key question, said one commentator, is whether this initiative will create meaningful change or simply fade away once the controversy dies down. Martinez turned off the TV. That's enough of that. Back to work, everyone. As the room cleared, she pulled aside an officer who had been particularly vocal in criticizing Wilson. Jackson, I'm assigning you to help Officer Wilson with the community integration program. But Sergeant. No buts. This department stands together. Wilson made a mistake, owned it, and is working to fix it. I expect you to do the same. Across town, Mayor Thompson sat in her office with her chief of staff, reviewing the day's events. Overall, I think we navigated this well, the chief of staff said. Your approval ratings might even go up. People appreciate a leader who can admit when things aren't perfect. The mayor wasn't thinking about approval ratings. She was looking at a framed photo on her desk, her swearing-in ceremony 3 years ago. She remembered promising to build bridges and strengthen community ties. Sometimes, she said, it takes an uncomfortable incident to show us where those bridges are needed most. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter. Saw you on TV. You and that cop actually made sense. Weird. Mayor Thompson smiled. If she could convince a skeptical teenager, perhaps there was hope for the rest of Riverside too. 6 months had passed since the traffic stop incident. On a warm Saturday morning, Riverside Park buzzed with activity as the community gathered for the first graduation ceremony of the Police Community Integration Program. Officer Wilson stood near the podium, watching as 25 officers and 15 community leaders prepared to receive their certificates. Nervous about your speech? Asked Lisa Chen, approaching him with 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed him one. A little, Wilson admitted. Public speaking still isn't my strong point. Chen laughed. You faced worse. Remember our first committee meeting? I thought we might come to blows over the ride-along policies. Wilson smiled at the memory. Chen had been his most vocal critic in the beginning, challenging every suggestion he made. Now, after months of working together, they had developed a mutual respect that surprised them both. We've come a long way, he said. Across the park, Mayor Thompson chatted with Captain Reynolds as they watched people take their seats. The wooden chairs, arranged in neat rows on the grass, were filling quickly with families and friends of the graduates. Did you ever imagine this would grow so big? The captain asked. Honestly, no, Mayor Thompson replied. I hoped for better communication between police and residents, but this has exceeded all my expectations. What had started as a simple idea, helping officers get to know community leaders and city officials, had expanded into a comprehensive program. New officers now spent time in every neighborhood, meeting business owners, attending community events, and learning about local concerns. City officials held regular forums where residents could voice issues directly. And most importantly, a new culture of cooperation had begun to take root. At 10 a.m. sharp, Mayor Thompson approached the podium. The crowd fell silent. 6 months ago, she began, an incident occurred that could have divided our community. A simple traffic stop, a case of mistaken identity, and the potential for mistrust. She paused, looking out at the diverse faces before her. Instead, we chose a different path. Together, we created something positive from that moment of tension. Today, we celebrate the first graduates of the Riverside Police Community Integration Program. Applause rippled through the audience. In the front row, Mrs. Garcia from the bakery sat beside Mr. Washington, the retired teacher. Once on opposite sides of the debate, they now served together on the program's advisory board. When it was Wilson's turn to speak, he stood tall in his uniform, no longer the nervous rookie who had almost handcuffed the mayor. The night I stopped Mayor Thompson's car, I was following procedure, he said. But procedures without understanding aren't enough. This program has taught me that effective policing requires knowing the people you serve, their faces, their names, their stories. He gestured toward the graduates. Each person here has learned that lesson too. Our officers now know which businesses stay open late, which neighborhoods have specific concerns, and yes, they know what their mayor looks like. This drew laughter from the crowd, including Mayor Thompson herself. After the ceremony, as people mingled and took photos, an elderly woman approached Wilson. My grandson just joined the police academy, she said. He wants to be an officer here in Riverside when he graduates next year. That's wonderful, Wilson replied. Why Riverside specifically? Because of what happened with you and the mayor, she explained. He said any department that can turn a mistake into something positive is where he wants to work. Later that afternoon, Wilson sat alone on a park bench, watching as the last of the event staff packed up chairs. Mayor Thompson spotted him and walked over. Mind if I join you? She asked. Not at all, Mayor Thompson. She sat down, looking out at the park. You know, after all we've been through, I think you can call me Elaine when we're not at official functions. Wilson smiled. I'd like that. And I'm James. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, reflecting on the journey from that tense traffic stop to today's celebration. So, James, she finally said, I hear you're up for promotion to Community Liaison Officer. Just a recommendation at this point, he replied modestly. A well-deserved one. She stood, offering her hand. Congratulations. As they shook hands, a young officer hurried past, then stopped and backtracked. Mayor Thompson, I need your signature on this permit for next week's charity run. Without hesitation, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her ID card. Always prepared now, she said with a wink to Wilson. What had begun as a potential disaster had transformed both the police department and the community, proving that sometimes the most meaningful changes come from the most unexpected moments.